In a war scenario marked by state-of-the-art technology, satellite stealthy drones and missiles, few people would imagine that weapons considered obsolete, almost museum pieces, could play a relevant role. However, the war in Ukraine has challenged all predictions. Amid the scarcity of resources and the relentless advance of Russian troops, weapons from decades ago are returning to the battlefield, and with surprising results. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion, in February 2022, Ukraine found itself in the face of a brutal dilemma: how to balance the need for defense with extremely limited resources. Allied countries have sent sophisticated equipment, it is true, but on the front line, what has attracted attention is not just these modern weapons, but old systems with more than half a century of existence, which have become central pieces in the conflict. Among these equipment, one stands out: the Soviet anti-aircraft cannon Zu-23-2. Designed in the late 1950s and officially placed on duty in the early 1960s, he was born with a very specific purpose. Subsonic aircraft abaters flying at low altitudes, a common threat at the height of the Cold War. Equipped with two 23mm cannons, the Zu-23-2 was compact and relatively light, about 4.5 meters long, 2-meter pipes, and a modest weight for its category. Its simple assembly allowed installation on trucks, rails, or even fixed bases. Projectiles could reach targets flying up to 2.5 kilometers altitude, enough to protect land troops from rashing air attacks. Initially, this cannon was an effective solution against ground attack aircraft and helicopters. However, with the advancement of defense technologies, he was eventually retired and replaced by more modern systems such as radar-guided land-air missiles. Many experts believed that the Zu-23-2 would never be seen again on the battlefield. However, the war in Ukraine rewritten this story. Contrary to what was predicted, the Zu-23-2 resurfaced as an essential piece. With its reduced cost, simple operation, and easy maintenance, it was soon incredibly effective against a new threat: drones. In a scenario where Russia has launched hundreds of attack drones, many of Iranian manufacturing, such as the Shahid model, the Zu-23-2 proved the perfect answer. These drones fly low, at reduced speed, and with predictable trajectories. Thus, the Ukrainian teams, already experienced in the management of the weapon, can predict the exact point of interception. The tactic is simple and brutally efficient. The Zu-23-2 has a very high shooting cadence, firing a true rain of 23mm projectiles. The top scorers, with visual accuracy and trained instinct, create a true wall of fire on the drone path. When Shahid or any other attack drone approaches, it can hardly cross this shot curtain. Another factor that contributes to the triumphant return of the Zu-23-2 is the cost. In a conflict where defense missiles are very expensive and scarce, Ukraine needed cheap and fast solutions. The Zu-23-2 uses ammunition that has existed in large quantities in the Ukrainian arsenals since the Soviet time. Projectiles were stocked to millions, ready to be used without importation. In addition, the cannon was modernized and adapted intelligently. Ukrainians started to install the Zu-23-2 into armored vehicles and trucks, turning it into an extremely agile mobile platform. This mobility ensures that the weapon can be brought rapidly to areas under attack, further increasing its effectiveness. In practice, what was seen as a museum weapon became a key piece of anti-aircraft defense. And not just against drones. The Zu-23-2 has also been used to slaughter planting bombs, another type of threat thrown by the Russians on a large scale. His firepower, coupled with the technical knowledge of the Ukrainians, turned him into a true shield against low-speed targets. The success of the Zu-23-2 also paved the way for the revaluation of other ancient weapons. The most notorious example is the German Gepard system, another veteran who returned to the battlefield with great protagonism. Gepard is a self-propelled air defense system developed by Germany during the 1960s that officially entered service in the 1970s. Originally created to protect armored forces and critical infrastructures against low-altitude air attacks, Gepard was built on the chassis of the famous Leopard 1 tank, which gave him considerable mobility on the battlefield. Armed with 235mm Oerlikon KDA automatic guns, Gepard is able to shoot up to 1,100 projectiles per minute, combining extremely high fire cadence with formidable accuracy. But what really differentiates Jeopard is not just its firepower, but its radar system. Equipped with a search radar with a range of up to 15 kilometers and a short-range tracking radar, Jeopard can detect, track, and shoot targets with an efficiency that impresses even the most skeptical military analysts. In the context of the war in Ukraine, Jeopard was mainly used in the defense of strategic points, such as power plants, military bases, and communication centers. His ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously transformed him rapidly into one of the pillars of Ukrainian anti-aircraft defense. Unlike many modern systems, which depend strongly on infrared sensors or complex electronic control systems, Jeopard works relatively simply and directly. Its search and tracking radars allow an almost instant response without the need for external connections or sophisticated guiding systems. This makes it ideal for situations where speed is essential, as in defense against surprise attacks with cruise drones or missiles. In practice, Jeopard has been mortally effective against drones such as Shahid, the same as the Zu-23-2 has successfully faced. But its true differential appears when the threat is even more complex. A remarkable example is Kh-101 Russian cruise missiles, sophisticated weapons flying at very high speeds, surpassing 900 kilometers per hour, at extremely low altitudes, and the ability to throw flares to mislead heat-guided missiles. These missiles are a nightmare for portable systems such as Manpad's shoulder anti-aircraft missiles, which depend on infrared sensors to lock the targets. However, Jeopard does not suffer from this limitation. Its radars detect the missile mechanically and electromagnetic, without depending on the heat generated by the enemy engine. Thus, he can acquire the target almost instantly and trigger a precise gust in a matter of seconds. This performance has saved lives and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. In regions where modern systems like Patriot or NASAMS are not available, Jeopard fills a vital gap in anti-aircraft defense. Its mobility is also a strategic advantage. Being based on a tank chassis, it can be quickly repositioned according to the needs of the moment, following changes in the Russian attack pattern. For a country under constant attack, this flexibility is as valuable as the variability to deduct the enemy. Faced with a war marked by the speed of attacks and the multiplicity of threats, Jeopard has become a versatile and reliable solution. And surprisingly, the maintenance of the system does not represent a major obstacle to Ukrainians. As many spare parts still exist in Europe and as Jeopard's functioning is relatively direct, he continues to operate without major difficulties, even decades after his initial project. But the most intriguing is how these ancient weapons have overcome modern systems in certain ways. In a battlefield saturated by drones and missiles, the most expensive or sophisticated weaponry is not always the most efficient. Zu-23-2 and Jeopard have proved that in many cases simplicity, robustness, and cost-effectiveness are the biggest advantages a system can offer. The war in Ukraine has clearly shown that the latest technology does not always guarantee superiority. Often, the victory on the battlefield depends on the ability to improvisation, adaptation, and resilience. And in this, the creative use of weapons considered obsolete has been one of the keys to Ukrainian success. These ancient weapons, far from being mere relics of the past, became protagonists in a conflict marked by intensive use of technology. They not only resurfaced as emergency solutions, but consolidated themselves as central tools in the country's anti-aircraft defense, protecting cities, infrastructure, and, above all, lives. The impact of this rediscovery is not limited to the military field. Analysts around the world began to question whether the rampant race by state-of-the-art weapons really makes sense in all war scenarios. After all, Ukraine is proving that, with ingenuity and adaptation, even pieces that were once relegated to deposits can change the course of a battle. What the war in Ukraine has widened is a truth that many analysts have ignored for decades. On the battlefield, the most advanced technology is not always the one that defines the outcome of a confrontation. Weapons considered obsolete, many of them developed during the Cold War, are proving that when used with intelligence and adapted to the context, they can be as efficient than state-of-the-art systems. This phenomenon does not occur by chance. The current war in Ukraine unfolds in a completely different scenario than many military theorists predicted. Instead of clashes between conventional forces, what is seen is an asymmetrical war, marked by cheap drone attacks, difficult cruise missiles, and saturation operations. Under these conditions, the simplest weapons gain space precisely because of their ability to offer quick, cheap, and efficient answers. Zu-23-2 and Gepard are clear examples of this logic. Both share a central feature: operational simplicity. While modern systems often require specialized training, complex defense networks, and expensive maintenance, these older weapons can be operated by practical experiences, with few technical adjustments. This dramatically reduces the time between identifying a threat and its neutralization. In addition, the economic factor cannot be ignored. State-of-the-art anti-aircraft missiles cost dozens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars per firing, not to mention the cost of maintenance and operation. Systems such as Zu-23-2 and Gepard use conventional ammunition, which are cheap, abundant, and, in the case of Ukraine, have often been stored since the Soviet season. Another essential point is mobility. The ability to quickly reposition systems like Gepard, thanks to its armored chassis, allows Ukraine to adapt its defense according to changes in Russian strategy. In a conflict where attack routes constantly vary, having a mobile defense can mean the difference between success and failure. But the true secret behind the success of these old weapons is the ability to adapt Ukrainians. Not only did they reactivate these platforms, but modernized them, integrated new communication systems, developed specific tactics, and, above all, adapted them to face threats that did not even exist when these weapons were projected. Kamikazes drones, Planius bombs, and high-speed cruise missiles were not part of the military scene when the Zu-23-2 and Gepard were created. However, the creativity of the Ukrainians showed that, with intelligent adjustments, these weapons could not only survive the new context but also stand out. Ultimately, what war in Ukraine demonstrates is that modern war is not defined only by technological brightness. It is, above all, an adaptation game. The Ukrainians understood this quickly. Instead of relying exclusively on expensive arms sent from abroad, they decided to enjoy everything they had available, including the pieces forgotten in the deposits. The result is an air defense strategy that combines the old and the new in a unique way. While drones and missiles try to overload the Ukrainian defenses, the old cannons and properly modernized radar systems, they continue to overthrow threats day after day. And all at a much lower cost than what would be spent on state-of-the-art weapons. This approach also launches a lesson for the world. No military equipment should be discarded only by age. In a real conflict, factors such as simplicity, robustness, and adaptability can be more relevant than simple technological advancement. Ukraine is proving this clearly. Amid massive attacks and constant pressures, weapons considered outdated became true protagonists of resistance. The Ukrainian battlefield has become, in practice, a living laboratory where old solutions come to a new life. The videos that circulate on social networks showing drones being knocked down by gusts of old guns are not mere anecdotes. They are proof that war demands more than technology. It requires ingenuity and resilience. While the conflict follows without a clear outcome, one thing is certain: war in Ukraine will forever change the way the world sees the concept of military obsolescence. Weapons like the Zu-23-2 and Gepard are now part of a new era, where creativity and adaptation weigh as much as any satellite-guided missile. And so, in the heart of Europe, weapons that were one day for museums continue to protect cities, overthrowing drones and remembering the world that in war, not always the most modern is the most effective.